It was the kind of December morning where the frost clings stubbornly to the earth. Quiet. Still. Nothing out of place in the Essex countryside. But down a lonely farm track near Rettendon, a Range Rover sat parked, its windows fogged, its silence heavier than the cold. Inside were three men, their lives brutally cut short. This was no random attack. It was an execution. The victims would come to be known as the Essex Boys. Yet, to understand what happened that morning, we have to go back and meet them, one by one. The first was a man called Tony Tucker. He wasn't just another face in the nightclub scene. He owned it. Tucker ran a private security firm that guarded clubs across Essex. He had connections, influence, and a reputation for getting his way. He'd even worked as a bodyguard for champion boxer Nigel Benn. But Tucker's world was darker than it looked from the outside. His name became tied to the tragic death of Leah Betts, an 18-year-old girl who collapsed after taking an ecstasy pill believed to have come through Tucker's supply chain. The tragedy drew national attention, and suddenly, his name was whispered with anger and fear alike. Beside Tucker sat a man called Pat Tate. If Tucker was brains and business, Tate was muscle and menace. A towering bodybuilder, loud and violent. He was the kind of man you didn't cross twice. He'd been in and out of prison, known for drug dealing, intimidation, and bursts of terrifying rage. People feared him, and he liked it that way. And then there was the youngest, a 26-year-old named Craig Rolfe. Not as well known, but no less dangerous. Rolfe was tangled up in cars, cocaine, and petty crime. Friends said he was unpredictable, short-tempered, a man sinking deeper into addiction and the wrong kind of company. On the surface, they looked untouchable, men who ran the Essex drug scene with fists and firepower. But on that cold December night, their power meant nothing. All three were found slumped inside that blue Range Rover, killed at point-blank range with a shotgun. No mercy, no warning, a message written in blood. The discovery was chilling. Two farmers, Peter Theobald and Ken Jiggins, stumbled upon the Range Rover early that morning. They expected nothing more than a quiet day's work in the fields. Instead, they found a crime scene that would dominate headlines for years to come. So who wanted them dead? And why? At first, police looked at rival gangs. The Essex Boys had made enemies everywhere. Dealers cheated, rivals threatened, debts unpaid. But soon, whispers turned toward one man in particular, a drug supplier called Michael Steele. Steele had a reputation: older, experienced, and ruthless in his own right. He'd been involved in smuggling and had made good money moving cannabis across borders. But there was bad blood brewing. Steele had delivered a batch of poor-quality cannabis to Tucker and his men. They weren't happy. Tucker demanded his deposit back. Steele gave in, but the humiliation cut deep. The Essex Boys had insulted him, mocked him, even threatened him with violence. Now, add another name: Jack Hooms, an associate of Steele. Together, Steele and Hooms would soon become the prime suspects in what came to be known as the Rettendon murders. But the police had nothing concrete. No weapon, no fingerprints, no eyewitness willing to speak. The case was ice cold until May 1996, when a small-time criminal called Darren Nichols was caught in a drug smuggling operation. Nichols was scared. Facing prison time, he decided to talk, and what he told police would change everything. Nichols claimed he'd been the getaway driver. According to him, Steele had arranged a meeting with the Essex Boys under the pretense of a cocaine deal. On that fateful night, Steele supposedly opened a gate to let the Range Rover through. Hidden nearby, Hooms stepped forward with a pump-action shotgun. In moments, the three men were dead. Afterwards, Steele allegedly turned to Hooms and said words that still echo through the case: "They won't fuck with us again." The investigation, known as Operation Century, had already burned through resources and undercover stings, but Nichols' testimony gave them what they needed: along with mobile phone evidence that seemed to place Steele and Holmes in the area. Prosecutors finally had their case. In January 1998, both men were convicted of murder at the Old Bailey and sentenced to life in prison. For the police, it was a victory. For the public, it was closure. The Essex Boys were gone, their killers behind bars. But for others, questions only grew louder. Nichols, after all, was hardly the perfect witness. He was a criminal himself, a fraudster and dealer who struck a deal to save his own skin. Over time, it emerged that he'd even been paid for media appearances, casting doubt on his motives. Could the fate of two men really rest on the word of someone so unreliable? Private investigators and former detectives began re-examining the case years later. Men like David McKelvey and Albert Patrick suggested something darker at play. The killings were too clean, too professional. The way the men were ambushed, execution style, felt more like the work of hired assassins than a simple grudge. They argued Steele and Holmes had been scapegoated, convicted because police needed answers, and fast. Meanwhile, time did its work. Jack Holmes served 23 years before being released on license in 2021. Michael Steele remained behind bars until June 2025, when, at over 80 years old, he was finally freed under strict conditions. No interviews, no media, no guns, no boats, no flights. Even in freedom, Steele's life is a prison of restrictions. Yet he still insists he is innocent. The Rettendon murders didn't just stay in the courtroom. They exploded into pop culture. Films like Essex Boys, Bonded by Blood, and the Rise of the Foot Soldiers series turned the story into legend, sometimes blurring truth with fiction. Documentaries kept the debate alive, and each retelling raised the same haunting question. Did the real killers ever face justice? Because that's the thing about this case. The official story says Steele and Holmes pulled the trigger. The whispers, the doubts, the theories, they refuse to die. Was it really revenge over a drug deal gone wrong? Or was there another hand guiding events? Another gang? Another power pulling strings behind the scenes? What we do know is this. On that icy December morning in 1995, three men who thought they were untouchable met their end in the back of a Range Rover. Their deaths marked the end of an era in Essex, and the beginning of a mystery that still lingers in the cold air of Rettendon. And perhaps, somewhere in those whispers, lies the truth that has never been told.